Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a philosopher or a king, but with something far more dangerous and complicated, dating in the Middle Ages. Because believe it or not, finding love in a time of plagues, dowries and chaperones was somehow even more awkward than texting someone, "What you doing?" at 2 a.m. From courtly love songs to marriage by livestock negotiation, medieval romance was less about butterflies and more about land rights. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you're standing in a medieval village, or maybe a chilly stone castle, wondering how to find love. Maybe strike up a conversation? Compliment someone's hose? Ask if they come here often? Nope. That's not how any of this works. If you're in the Middle Ages, dating, in the modern sense, doesn't really exist. You don't flirt, text, or go for long walks to see where it goes. Instead, your parents, or your lord or your abbot, are already deciding who you'll marry, when, and how many cows it will take to seal the deal. If you're a noble, you've probably been betrothed since before your voice dropped. You and your future spouse might meet for the first time on your wedding day. And yes, that's just as uncomfortable as it sounds. The whole thing is about land, titles, and family alliances. Not compatibility or how good they are at lute solos. If you're a peasant, things are slightly less formal, but only slightly. Your family still has a strong say, and love isn't really part of the discussion. Maybe your parents know a nice girl whose family owns a productive goat. Maybe they admire a boy who can thatch a roof without falling off. Boom. You're courting now. Lucky you. It's not that people in the Middle Ages don't feel romantic. They do. It's just not the priority. The goal is survival, inheritance, and social stability. Falling in love before marriage? That's risky. Falling in love outside of marriage? That's scandalous. Either way, it's frowned upon. Unless you're a character in a tragic poem, in which case, go wild. And yet, you dream. Maybe you write a little verse on a scrap of parchment. Maybe you sneak a glance across the market. Maybe, just maybe, you fall for someone who wasn't pre-approved by your family's livestock appraiser. But for now, you wait, you obey, you try not to fall for the miller's apprentice. Because in this world, love might be the goal of poets, but marriage is the work of parents, priests, and politics. So you think someone's cute. Maybe it's the way they balance a basket of onions on their head. Maybe it's the confident way they beat mud off a rug. Your medieval heart skips a beat. But steady yourself, because in this world, romance doesn't bloom without a balance sheet. Before you even think about courtship, you'd better ask, what do I bring to the table? And if your answer is a charming personality, you might want to sit down. If you're a young man, you'll need land, or livestock, or tools, or a roof that doesn't leak too much. Love letters are nice, but nothing says husband material like 2 healthy oxen and a roof that can survive a mild storm. If your father has already promised the best goat to your brother, well, you might want to consider the priesthood. If you're a young woman, your family needs a dowry. That could be coin, clothing, or a suspiciously generous number of geese. Doesn't matter how witty you are, if your family can't pay up, you're likely to spend a long time perfecting your embroidery alone. Now let's say you actually like someone who makes your calloused heart flutter. You lock eyes at the well. There's a spark. It's romantic. It's poetic. It's completely irrelevant, because unless your families are on equal financial footing, you might as well fall in love with a cloud. If you're noble, it gets worse. Your hand in marriage is tied to land, borders, and political favours. You're not just a person. You're a walking treaty. Congratulations. Even peasants aren't safe. Marriage is practical. You don't marry for butterflies. You marry because your pig pen borders someone else's wheat field. You dream of passion. You settle for irrigation rights. And yet, you try. Maybe you offer a small gift, a carved spoon, a handful of berries, or your finest slightly cracked mug. Maybe they smile, maybe they don't. But the truth remains. In medieval dating, economics is the flirting, and love is just a bonus you hope your spouse develops eventually. So let's say you're not a peasant worrying about pigs or a noble dealing with treaties. Let's say you're a knight. Shiny armour, big horse, questionable poetry skills. What's your love life like? Welcome to the strange and emotionally exhausting world of courtly love. Now, this isn't dating. This is performance art. Courtly love was a noble pastime, part flirting, part spiritual suffering, and entirely impractical. You, the brave knight, choose a noble lady, usually one who's already married, and vow to adore her from afar. Not physically, of course. That would ruin everything. No, you're supposed to suffer. Elegantly. You might compose a few tortured verses about her silver laugh, or how her hair burns like the sun, which, in medieval terms, means she has hair and didn't insult your family. You wear her colours at tournaments. You pine. You sigh. You occasionally joust someone just because he glanced at her too long. The lady's role? She's supposed to pretend this is all very flattering while maintaining a level of icy detachment that would terrify a glacier. She may respond with a letter, a token, maybe a ribbon, but mostly she'll just be mysterious and unattainable, which is the entire point. The emotions are high, the actual contact, minimal. At best, you might get a nod from across the hall or a finger brushed against your gauntlet during a feast. Anything more, and suddenly it's not courtly love. It's a scandal. Or worse, adultery. And no one wants that. At least, not officially. This entire setup worked best when everyone involved agreed it was mostly pretend. It was a way to express longing, devotion, and creative angst, all without disrupting the social order. A medieval venting mechanism, if you will. Was it dramatic? Absolutely. Did it involve more poetry than practicality? Constantly. But for a knight stuck between battles and boredom, courtly love gave you something to write about, and someone to write for. Just don't expect a happy ending, or a kiss, or even eye contact. So you've fallen for someone. Great. Now comes the hard part, expressing that affection in a society where touching someone's hand without a chaperone is basically a declaration of war. Welcome to the medieval solution, tokens. Think of it as 12th century texting, slow, confusing, and open to wildly inaccurate interpretation. Let's say you're a knight and you're hopelessly in love with Lady Marjorie, of whatever her last name is. You can't speak to her alone, and your poems keep getting intercepted by her confessor. What do? You send her a glove. Or maybe your embroidered sleeve. Nothing says I love you like mailing someone part of your wardrobe. And if you're on the receiving end? Congratulations. You now have a sweaty linen sleeve you didn't ask for, and the romantic burden of pretending you know what it means. Is he confessing love? Asking for a favour? Suggesting a duel? Who knows? Women gave tokens too. A ribbon, a piece of hair, a tiny pendant. It was sentimental, sure, but also deeply strategic. Give the wrong guy the wrong token, and suddenly you're spoken for by someone with a lazy eye and a drinking problem. Tokens were meant to be subtle. A glove pinned to your chest, a ribbon tied to your sword hilt. Everyone knew what it meant, and no one said what it meant. The more cryptic, the better. It was less about communication and more about plausible deniability. Oh, this glove? No, it's not from Lady Joan. It just appeared on my pillow, scented with lavender, completely random. For commoners, tokens were simpler. Maybe a wood carving, maybe a handkerchief you stitched when you weren't milking something. It was still romantic, just with more calluses involved. Tokens were also risky. Giving one to the wrong person could spark rumours. Receiving one you didn't want meant figuring out how to politely return someone's sock without insulting their lineage. But for all the awkwardness, these tokens carried real emotional weight. They were symbols of love in a world that didn't allow much room for it. So you finally build up the courage to talk to your crush. Maybe offer them a flower. Maybe quote a little bad poetry you definitely didn't steal from a travelling minstrel. You're ready for a moment of intimacy. Unfortunately, you're not alone. Welcome to the world of medieval dating surveillance, where love is never blind. It's heavily monitored by your mother, your priest, a nosy cousin, and sometimes all three at once. Let's say you're a young woman of marrying age. You're never just going for a walk. You're going for a walk with Margaret and her terrifyingly strict aunt, who's already judging your posture. Even if you're simply fetching water, someone is watching. Someone is always watching. It's less dating, more espionage. And if you're a man trying to court someone, better hope you have the approval of her family, her parish priest, and the local gossip network. You show up at her house with flowers? Her father's behind the door, sharpening something. Her mother's pretending to stir a pot that hasn't boiled in 3 hours, and the village priest just happens to be passing by, on his way to morning prayers, at sunset. The logic behind all this supervision was simple. Protect virtue, preserve family honour, and absolutely prevent any unsanctioned touching, especially before marriage, especially alone, especially ever. Chaperones were there to monitor innocent interactions. Group outings, monitored, walks, supervised, sitting within a 2-metre radius of each other on a bench, only if someone's grandmother is knitting nearby and pretending not to listen. The church, of course, had opinions, lots of them. It regulated courtship the way a bouncer regulates a nightclub. Priests gave sermons about proper conduct and wrote lengthy treatises on the dangers of flirtation. Yes, that's right. Medieval clergy published anti-flirting manuals. Imagine someone copying those out by candlelight while monks silently judge you from across the scriptorium. Even letter writing wasn't safe. Some monasteries opened love letters just to screen for moral content. That's right, divine censorship. So if you want to fall in love, you'll have to get used to doing it quietly, and in the presence of your entire extended family, and possibly God. So, you're in love. Or at least medieval in love, which is mostly longing, confusion, and a lot of pacing near windows. You've exchanged glances across a feast. Maybe they picked up your dropped handkerchief and didn't immediately throw it into the fire. The tension is unbearable. But you still can't speak freely. There are chaperones, priests, mothers lurking like emotional border patrol agents. So what do? You write a letter. Ah, yes. The secret love letter. The most dangerous piece of parchment since the excommunication notice. This is your chance to confess your heart, using the most cryptic, overly poetic language possible. Because you can't just say, I like you. You must say, my soul is a stag, pierced by the arrow of your grace, roaming the forests of yearning. Naturally, if you're literate, which, let's be honest, isn't a given, you pen your message on vellum or rough parchment. If you're really dedicated, you dust it with flower petals or perfume. Just be careful with that. One noble accidentally used a love letter to wrap a herring and delivered it to the wrong girl. They're married now. It's fine. Now comes the problem of delivery. You can't just hand it over. You need a courier, a loyal servant, a bribed monk, or a younger sibling with limited understanding of consequences. Sometimes even a minstrel would do the job, singing your poem in the town square while pretending it was anonymous. Subtle. And the poetry? Risky. Very risky. The line between romantic and heresy was thinner than a monk's patience during Lent. If your metaphor even hinted at anything physical, you might find yourself confessing to both lust and literary exaggeration. But despite all the rules, people did write. Some letters survived. Some poems were copied and passed around like forbidden fruit. In a world of rigid roles and constant supervision, a folded scrap of words could feel revolutionary. So you write, you risk it. You press your trembling hand to the parchment and say everything you can't say aloud. Just don't sign it too clearly. You want romance, not a church trial. Finally, a break, a feast day, a harvest festival, a maypole dance. In short, a rare moment when your life isn't just work, prayer, and pretending you're not interested in the blacksmith's daughter. Today, you're allowed to flirt. Sort of. As long as no one sees. Or everyone sees, but pretends not to. Welcome to medieval festivals, where romance blooms under the watchful eyes of everyone you've ever met, and 3 chickens. Festivals were one of the few socially approved moments when men and women could mingle, laugh, and, dare we say, make eye contact. There's music, there's ale, there's someone wearing a flower crown with dangerous confidence. You've never seen so many people not pretending to be miserable. If you're a peasant, you might try to impress your crush by winning the sack race, catching a greased pig, or juggling 3 stale rolls of bread. Nothing says, "I'm available," like falling off a hay bale with dignity. Dancing was your best shot at actual physical contact. The rules were rigid, but a well-timed spin or a not-quite-accidental hand graze could say more than any poem. The maypole dance, for example, was basically a giant excuse for coordinated flirtation wrapped in ribbons and plausible deniability. And if you're noble? Your version of flirting at a festival involved less hay and more poetry. You might compose a verse on the spot, compare your lady's eyes to twin candles, or other glowing things, and offer a trinket. Hopefully not one that was clearly made by your servant 5 minutes earlier. Food helped too. Offer your beloved a meat pie, or share a honey cake. If they accept it with a smile, you're doing well. If they hand it to their dog, start over with someone else. But remember, everything you do, someone is watching. A parent, a priest, a bard with a big mouth. One misstep, and your flirty smile becomes a youthful indiscretion discussed at church for the next 6 weeks. Still, for a few hours you can pretend. Pretend you're in a world where love isn't a transaction, where laughter isn't suspicious, and where dancing in public doesn't end in penance. Let's say you're not a knight, a noble, or a bard with a lute and excessive feelings. You're a regular villager. You wake up with the cows, go to bed with the chickens, and spend most of your day ankle-deep in mud. You're not looking for a poetic soulmate. You're looking for someone who can milk a goat without emotional drama. Welcome to peasant courtship, where romance is practical, gestures are modest, and chemistry means we can survive winter together. In your world, dating is less about long conversations and more about shared tasks. You notice someone you like because they work hard, don't complain much, and have a decent set of teeth. That's it. That's the whole checklist. You're not picky. You're realistic. You don't need fireworks. You need someone who can gut a fish and maybe doesn't snore too loudly. So how do you show interest? You give gifts, small, useful things. A basket of eggs, a bundle of firewood, a good turnip. And if you're feeling bold, maybe a woven ribbon or a carved spoon. Nothing says, "I'm serious about you," like a spoon you whittled by candlelight while your pig judged you silently. Conversations happen during shared chores. You might walk together to the mill, chat while tending sheep, or exchange pleasantries while shoveling something that smells questionable. No one's reciting poetry. You're talking about the weather, crop yields, and whether or not old Thomas fell in the well again. And yet, in its own way, it's romantic. There's a sweetness in the simplicity. A shared life built not on idealism, but on cooperation. You know each other's strengths, weaknesses, and how fast they run when a goat escapes. Proposals often came quickly. If you both agreed, and the families did too, marriage followed. Maybe you moved into a shared hut. Maybe you built a new one from scratch with help from the village. You brought your best blanket. They brought a goat. Together, you began the strange miracle of domestic survival. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. You've done it. You found someone who can cook, clean, tolerate your family, and doesn't visibly recoil at the sight of your feet. True love, right? Now it's time to get married, which, in medieval terms, means you're entering into a contract. Not a dreamy vow under the stars. A legally binding transaction, often negotiated with all the passion of a livestock auction. If you're a peasant, it's still a big deal. You gather a few witnesses, talk to the local priest, and try not to trip over the Latin during the ceremony. But behind the sweet-sounding blessings is a serious checklist. Dowry, land rights, who gets the cow, and what happens if someone dies during planting season. Ah yes, romance. If you're from the upper class, buckle up. Your marriage is a full-blown legal negotiation. Your parents, their parents, the priest, a scribe, maybe a cousin who once studied law. They're all in on it. The bride and groom, mostly just standing nearby, looking decorative and nodding when spoken to. You may or may not have even met the person you're marrying. Your family has done the math. Your estate needs her fields, her dowry balances your debts, and both of your coats of arms look good next to each other. Love is optional. The merger is not. And once you're married, it's permanent. Divorce isn't really a thing unless you can prove someone wasn't baptized, was secretly related to you, or died and forgot to mention it. Annulments existed, but they required a lot of paperwork, a bit of luck, and a solid bribe. Still, not everything is bleak. Some couples genuinely grew to love each other, shared chores, raising children, surviving winters. These things have a way of building affection, or at least tolerance, which in medieval terms is basically the same thing. The church was involved in every step. Marriage was a holy sacrament, one of the 7 big ones. You didn't just marry for legal reasons, you married because God needed a witness. Possibly 2. So you stand, exchange vows, and smile as someone hands over a sack of onions and calls it a blessing. So, let's say you've had enough. Enough contracts, enough negotiations, enough being treated like a particularly valuable sack of flour. You're a noble, but for once, you want to marry for love. Not for land, not for lineage, not for your father's strategic ambitions, just love. Congratulations, you're about to cause a scandal. Noble elopements were the medieval equivalent of lighting your family tree on fire and dancing in the ashes. If you ran off to marry someone of your own choosing, it wasn't just personal rebellion, it was political sabotage. Let's say you're Lady Eleanor, promised to Sir Boring von Estate Secure, but you've fallen madly in love with a penniless squire who smells faintly of horses and adventure. You meet in secret, whisper sweet nothings in the stables, and one day, you vanish. Off to a monastery where the abbot owes you a favour. There you marry under questionable legality, with only a nervous monk and 2 chickens as witnesses. Back at home, chaos. Your family? Outraged. Your father? Threatening to siege the groom's family garden. Your mother? Crying into her embroidery hoop. The church? Deeply concerned. The gossip? Delicious. And if you're the groom in this romantic rebellion, don't get too comfortable. Best case scenario? You get to keep your bride and your kneecaps. Worst case? You're excommunicated and disemboweled, in that order. Still, some couples got away with it. If the union couldn't be undone without causing even more embarrassment, families sometimes just sighed and moved on. After all, what's done is done, and at least nobody died. Hopefully. In rare cases, these scandals became legends. Songs were written, poems composed, stories whispered at banquets. 2 nobles who chose love over duty. Practically mythological. And yes, most noble marriages were transactional, but these moments, brief rebellions, passionate escapes, whispered vows beneath moonlit towers, they reminded the world that love, though inconvenient, refused to go extinct. So if you ever feel dramatic for swiping left or turning down a second date, just remember, at least your love life doesn't involve secret weddings, angry barons, and a horse tied to a ladder outside your window. Ah, marriage. That beautiful union of 2 souls, and their respective financial portfolios. Because in the Middle Ages love was nice, but a dowry? Now that was truly romantic. Let's say you're a bride. You're not just getting married, you're being launched, like a small dowry-equipped economic vessel. Your family prepares your dowry: money, livestock, land, linens, a cow or two, depending on how lovable they think you are, and maybe even a set of pewter dishes if they're feeling generous. These offerings go to your future husband, who accepts you and your portable wealth with open arms and a mental calculator. Now flip the scenario. In some cultures or regions, it's not the bride's family giving the goods, it's the bride price. The groom pays her family for the honour of marrying her, effectively saying, "Here's a horse, a cloak, and 3 pigs. Now give me your daughter." Medieval romance at its finest. The point is, someone is paying someone. You're getting married, and there is absolutely a receipt involved. These exchanges weren't just about wealth. They were about status, expectations, and public statements. A large dowry might indicate a bride came from a prestigious family. A stingy one might suggest they were trying to offload her quickly, possibly due to suspicious personality traits or a habit of talking back. You, as the bride, didn't usually get to keep your dowry. It became part of the household economy, managed by your husband, guarded by the law, and hopefully not gambled away on dice and ale within the first month of marriage. If the marriage ended, through death, annulment, or your husband wandering off to join a monastery after midlife regret, your dowry could theoretically be returned. But retrieving it was often harder than pulling a sword from a stone. You'd need support, legal backing, and ideally someone who could read. Meanwhile, the bride price, if paid, was like buying a rare goat, expensive up front and no refunds. It compensated the bride's family for the loss of her labour. After all, who's going to milk the sheep now? So while love was occasionally in the mix, money was always at the altar. So you didn't go the marriage route. Maybe you were the second son, or your dowry was suspiciously small, or you just really liked chanting. Either way, you've joined a monastery or convent. Congratulations, you've now taken a vow of poverty, chastity, and an aggressive disinterest in romance. And yet, here you are, in a stone cloister surrounded by silence, candle smoke, and Brother Anselm's unexpectedly soulful eyes. Yes, even behind monastery walls, forbidden love found a way. To be clear, falling in love in a religious order was deeply discouraged. Like, you might get whipped, exiled, or lectured by someone with a Latin name. Discouraged. You've sworn to give your heart entirely to God, which means giving it to literally no one else. But hearts are unruly, and sometimes prayers start sounding a lot like love poems. Maybe it starts with innocent tasks. Passing each other bread in the refectory, whispering during Vespers, laughing a little too hard when someone drops a hymnal. Before you know it, you're tucking extra cheese into Sister Beatrice's satchel and questioning everything. Some monks and nuns wrote passionate letters, disguised, of course, as theological musings. "Your soul is a shining light in the darkness of my contemplation" sounds holy, unless you read between the lines. And many did. There were, inevitably, scandals, secret meetings in the herb garden, midnight confessions that weren't strictly sacramental, and the occasional gasp-worthy discovery of a nun with a suspiciously round belly. The punishment, usually harsh: exile, public penance, or being reassigned to some far-off abbey known mostly for sheep and silence. Still, not all stories ended in disgrace. Some lovers escaped. A few even got married after being defrocked. Most, though, returned to their cloisters, red-faced and redevoted, swearing that the whole thing was just an overzealous theological debate. Because in the end, monastic life was about discipline. But humans are humans, even in robes, even in silence. And sometimes a quiet glance across the chapel was more thrilling than any tournament or courtly poem. You did it. You got married. There was a priest, a pig roast, and someone spilled mead on your mother's only nice cloak. But now it's been a few months, or years, and something feels off. Maybe your spouse snores like a dying lute. Maybe they forgot to mention their chronic gambling problem. Or maybe you just realised that marrying for land and sheep doesn't automatically result in romantic bliss. Either way, welcome to the world of medieval marital disappointment. Now, don't go reaching for the divorce papers, because they don't exist. At least, not in any form you'd recognise. Marriage was a sacred and unbreakable bond, approved by the Church, sealed by God, and enforced by public shame. You could try for an annulment, but you'd need a very good reason. We don't get along doesn't cut it. You'd have to prove that one of you was underage, already married, too closely related, which happened disturbingly often, or, best case scenario, never consummated the marriage, which meant someone had to confirm that fact, in writing, possibly under oath. Good luck. If you're a noble, it gets messier. Your marriage wasn't just personal, it was political. Trying to escape it could start a feud, ignite a scandal, or launch a minor war. Best to just quietly resent each other and attend separate feasts. So what do unhappy couples do? Mostly they just endure. You sleep in different beds. You sigh dramatically at dinner. You pour your feelings into embroidery, or that one really angry psalm. Passive aggression becomes your love language. Of course, affairs happened, usually quietly, sometimes spectacularly. Nobles had secret lovers. Peasants had suspiciously helpful neighbours. The Church condemned it, of course, but that didn't stop people. It just made them better at sneaking around barns and blaming things on God's mysterious will. For women, getting out of a bad marriage was especially hard. Even if your husband was violent or vanished, society expected you to stay loyal, silent, and mildly pious while surviving off bread crusts and disapproval. Still, some people made it work. Marriages weren't always happy, but they could become partnerships, forged by hardship, habit, and the shared experience of hauling firewood in the rain. Let's say your spouse dies. Maybe it was the plague. Maybe a farm accident. Maybe they tripped over a goose in the dark. However it happened, you're now widowed. And suddenly, the medieval dating pool opens back up. Being a widow in the Middle Ages was oddly liberating. Not do whatever you want liberating, but certainly more freedom than you had before. For women, especially, widowhood often brought a taste of independence, managing land, making decisions, even speaking in public without being immediately shushed. And if you were young-ish and still had teeth, you could remarry, quickly, very quickly. Mourning periods existed, but so did survival instincts. A widow with land and no husband was basically a walking treasure chest. Suitors appeared with alarming speed, some sincere, others just very enthusiastic about your dairy cows. If you're a man and recently widowed, society practically pushes you back into marriage. Who else is going to cook, clean, and raise the 11 children you somehow accumulated? So you start looking. Maybe the baker's daughter, maybe that quiet widow who always brings suspiciously good mead to market. Romance in second marriages could be surprisingly sweet. This time around, you're older, wiser. You're not being pushed into an alliance. You're choosing someone to survive with. Maybe even someone you like. Wild concept. Of course, there were rules. The Church frowned on remarriage that happened too quickly. Like, your spouse isn't cold yet. Quickly. And widows often had to negotiate with family over dowries and inheritance. Nothing says romantic second chance like arguing with your brother-in-law over who keeps the butter churn. But still, second marriages were common, even expected. Life was short, winters were long. No one wanted to spend them alone if they didn't have to. And yes, love was part of it. Maybe not the swooning, sonnet-writing kind, but the quiet kind, based on shared stories, mutual respect, and the understanding that both of you had already seen some things. So you light the fire, pour the soup, and try again. Not because it's perfect, but because it's human. You've made it this far, survived the contracts, the courtships, the chaperones, and possibly a dramatic barn elopement. But before you fall for someone new, ask yourself the most medieval question of all. Are you cosmically allowed to love this person? Because in the Middle Ages, love wasn't just a matter of the heart. It was a matter of stars, bones,